The coffee maker beeped, signaling the end of its brewing cycle just as my phone vibrated on the granite countertop. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, leaving the gardening shears next to the sink. It was a Tuesday morning, quiet and predictable, exactly how I liked my life since my husband passed 5 years ago. I picked up the phone. A text from my daughter Sarah. I didn't expect a message from her. We hadn't spoken in 3 weeks, not since she asked me to cover the catering deposit for her upcoming anniversary party. I opened the message expecting another request for my credit card number. Instead, the words on the screen were entirely different. Don't come to the family reunion this weekend. Greg's parents are hosting, and it's a very specific crowd. We're cutting ties for now. It's better this way. I stood completely still. The morning sun angled through the kitchen window, warming the hardwood floor, but the house suddenly felt entirely empty. I read the text a second time. There was no softening, no explanation, just a cold dismissal. She didn't want me there, and she didn't want me in her life unless I was useful. I set the phone down and poured my coffee. The ceramic mug felt heavy in my hand. A younger version of myself might have cried. A more fragile woman might have called her demanding an explanation, begging for a reason why her own daughter was shutting her out. But I was 66, and I had spent the last decade watching Sarah morph into someone I barely recognized. A woman who chased status over substance, heavily influenced by a husband who measured human worth in zip codes. I picked up the phone again. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I didn't type a paragraph. I didn't ask why. Understood, I replied. I hit send, locked the screen, and slid the phone into my apron pocket. I took a sip of my coffee. It was perfectly warm. The ties were cut just as she wanted. Now it was time to make sure those ties included the bank accounts. The $1.5 million trust was never a secret, but it was never something we flaunted. My late husband, Thomas, had worked tirelessly in commercial real estate. When he passed, the life insurance and the sale of his shares went into a revocable family trust. I was the sole trustee, the absolute owner until my death. But I had listed Sarah as a joint authorized user on the primary checking account linked to it. I wanted her to have a safety net. Over the last 3 years, that safety net had become her personal slush fund. I walked into my home office, a small room off the living room, filled with Thomas's old books and my gardening catalogs. I sat at the oak desk and woke up my computer. The house was entirely silent, save for the hum of the central air conditioning. I logged into my primary banking portal. Sarah and Greg lived in a sprawling subdivision in Dallas, 3 hours away. They drove luxury SUVs and sent their kids to private schools they could barely afford. Whenever the tuition bill came due or the property taxes spiked, Sarah would dip into the account. I had always allowed it, thinking I was helping my family. I had tolerated Greg's condescending remarks at Thanksgiving. I had endured Sarah's constant critiques of my clothes, my house, and my quiet lifestyle. Not anymore. You don't get to treat people like embarrassing burdens while silently living off their grace. I clicked on the Account Management tab. My screen displayed the joint user settings. Sarah's name sat right there, bold and entitled. With 3 clicks, I removed her authorization. I didn't need a lawyer. I didn't need a judge. The account was mine, and the bank's interface was perfectly efficient. Next, I accessed the trust management page. I downloaded the beneficiary amendment forms. It was a simple administrative process I could complete with a notary down at the local shipping store. I printed the documents, the printer whirring quietly in the corner. I stacked the papers neatly and placed them in a manila folder. I felt no anger, only a profound sense of clarity. The heavy fog of obligation had finally lifted. Tomorrow, I would visit the bank in person to finalize everything. But for tonight, the bleeding had stopped. Wednesday morning arrived with a cool breeze. I grabbed the manila folder, my purse, and my car keys. The drive to the bank took 10 minutes winding through my quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. I listened to a jazz station tapping my fingers on the steering wheel. I slept incredibly well the night before. There was a unique kind of peace that came from accepting someone exactly as they presented themselves. Mr. Henderson, the branch manager, knew me well. We sat in his glass-walled office chatting about the unseasonable heat before I handed him the forms. "I'm removing Sarah from all accounts, effective immediately." I stated my tone conversational, but firm. "I also need a new debit card issued, and I want all auto drafts linked to her Dallas address canceled." Mr. Henderson reviewed the paperwork, nodding slowly. "Everything is in order, Andrea. The funds are entirely under your control. The changes will reflect in the system by this afternoon." "Thank you, David." I stood smoothing my slacks. By the time I returned home, the weekend was approaching. The family reunion Sarah had mentioned was scheduled for Saturday. It was actually an extravagant networking event, disguised as a barbecue hosted by Greg's wealthy parents. They had rented a private lakeside pavilion. I knew Sarah had been bragging about it for months, desperate to impress her in-laws' social circle. I spent Thursday pruning the rose bushes in my front yard. I wore my wide-brimmed hat and thick gloves, kneeling in the dirt, breathing in the scent of damp soil. My neighbor Patricia walked by with her golden retriever and waved. We chatted about the upcoming community bake sale. Life went on. Friday evening, I checked my bank portal one last time. The joint access was gone. The auto drafts for Sarah's country club membership and her car lease, both scheduled for the first of the month, were successfully canceled. I closed the laptop and went to the kitchen to prepare a simple dinner of roasted salmon and asparagus. The house felt warm and entirely mine. The trap hadn't been set by me. Sarah had built it herself. I was simply removing my foundation from underneath it. I sat at the dining table, enjoying my meal, knowing that in a few short hours, reality was going to knock on her door. Saturday morning, the day of the grand reunion, my doorbell rang at 9 o'clock. I wiped my hands and opened the door to find my nephew, Ben. He was my late sister's son, a 24-year-old apprentice electrician who always had a smudge of dirt on his jeans and a genuine smile on his face. "And Andrea, I brought those brackets for the patio awning," he announced, holding up a paper bag from the hardware store. "Come on in, Ben. Have you had breakfast?" I stepped aside, letting him walk into the kitchen. Ben visited me twice a month. He never asked for money, never made me feel like an obligation, and always fixed the little things around the house that I couldn't reach. While he ate a plate of scrambled eggs and toast, I watched him. He worked 50 hours a week and was trying to save enough to buy a used work van to start his own contracting business. "Are you not going to Sarah's big lakeside thing today?" Ben asked between bites, looking up at me. "No," I replied smoothly, pouring myself more coffee. "Sarah felt it was best I didn't attend." Ben frowned his fork, pausing in midair. "Are you serious? After everything you do for them?" He shook his head, looking genuinely frustrated. "That's messed up, Aunt Andrea. You shouldn't let them treat you like that." "I'm not," I smiled, taking a sip of my coffee. "I'm really not." After breakfast, Ben spent an hour on the patio fixing the awning. I sat in a wicker chair, handing him screws and listening to him talk about his business plans. He was bright, capable, and entirely self-made. When he finished, I handed him a $20 bill for the parts. He tried to refuse, but I tucked it into his shirt pocket. "I'm proud of you, Ben," I told him as he packed his toolbox. He grinned. "Thanks, Aunt Andrea. Call me if that awning acts up again." Watching his old sedan pull out of my driveway, my decision solidified. The wealth Thomas and I had built wasn't meant to fuel a superficial lifestyle for people who despised me. It was meant to build futures. Sarah had made her choice. Now I was making mine. I walked inside and glanced at my phone. The screen was dark. The storm hadn't hit yet, but the clouds were gathering. Sunday morning. The reunion was over. I was sitting on my back porch reading a mystery novel when my phone screen illuminated. Sarah. I let it ring. It stopped, then immediately started ringing again. I turned the page of my book. 10 minutes later, a text arrived. Mom, my card just declined at the brunch place. Did you lock the account? Fix it, please. We have Greg's parents with us. I didn't reply. I simply placed the phone face down on the glass patio table. The boundary was set. She had asked for ties to be cut, and I was respecting her wishes with absolute precision. An hour later, the phone buzzed so violently it vibrated across the table. I picked it up. 8 missed calls from Sarah, 5 from Greg. I swiped the screen and went into my settings, turning the ringer completely off. I wasn't going to let their panic ruin a perfectly beautiful Sunday. I went inside, grabbed my gardening tote, and headed out to the vegetable patch. By 3 in the afternoon, the situation had escalated. When I finally checked my screen, the notification bubble was bright red. 69 missed calls. The barrage was relentless. There were texts in all caps. Mom, answer the phone. This is not funny. What did you do to the trust? I scrolled past them, feeling a mild detachment. It was fascinating how quickly her tone shifted from cold dismissal to frantic demands when the financial pipeline was severed. She didn't miss her mother, she missed her wallet. Then a new notification popped up, a voicemail from an unknown number. I pressed play, holding the phone to my ear as I washed dirt from my hands at the kitchen sink. The voice was male deep and trying entirely too hard to sound authoritative. Mrs. Mills, this is Richard Vance. I am legal counsel for Greg's family. We are currently reviewing a severe breach of agreement regarding the collateralized assets in your trust. I strongly advise you to return my call immediately before we escalate this matter. I dried my hands on a towel. Collateralized assets, I almost laughed. They had tried to use my trust as collateral for something, assuming I would never notice or never cut them off. I deleted the voicemail. My money, my rules. No lawyer could change that. I brewed some tea, waiting for the inevitable. They arrived at dusk, Greg's SUV pulling aggressively into my driveway. I stayed perfectly calm, waiting until the frantic knocking started on the front porch. I opened the heavy wooden door, but kept the reinforced screen securely locked. Sarah stood there looking completely unraveled, demanding to know why I had locked her out of the account and humiliated her. You said we were cutting ties, I reminded her calmly. I just made it official. She shrieked that her text was only about the reunion, but I stood my ground. It was never your money, Sarah. It was mine. And I won't share it with someone who treats me like an embarrassment. Then Greg pushed forward, furious. He demanded I reverse the account changes, immediately revealing they had secretly used my trust ledger to secure a bridge loan for their new house. If the funds remained inaccessible, the bank would pull their financing. I stared at him, seeing the true depth of his arrogance. You committed fraud, Greg. That is entirely your problem. He yelled that we had an understanding, but I swiftly shut him down. I told them they had a loan, they couldn't pay no more safety net, and ordered them off my porch before I called neighborhood security. Sarah stared at me, her mouth slightly open. For the first time in her adult life, the realization seemed to hit her that she held absolutely no power over me. The tears started, then frantic, angry tears. You're ruining my life, she cried, gripping the handle of the locked screen door, rattling it uselessly. Over a stupid text? I can't believe you're being this vindictive. I'm not being vindictive, I said quietly, watching her throw a tantrum suitable for a toddler. I'm being financially responsible. I spent years pretending your disrespect was just a phase. I spent years funding a lifestyle that I wasn't even allowed to be a part of. The text wasn't the cause, Sarah. It was just the end of my patience. Greg grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "Don't beg her, Sarah. We'll handle this. We'll get a real attorney and freeze her assets." I offered him a small, pitying smile. "You can't freeze what you have no legal right to, Greg. Mr. Henderson at the bank assured me of that. You are chasing ghosts." I stepped back from the door. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't hurl insults. I simply turned my back on them and walked toward the kitchen. "Mom!" Sarah yelled, her voice cracking, echoing through the quiet neighborhood. "Mom, please, we can talk about this." I didn't turn around. I walked into the kitchen, turned on the faucet, and began washing my teacup. Through the open window, I heard Greg cursing loudly. I heard the car doors slam. I heard the SUV engine roar to life, tires spinning on the gravel as they sped away. The silence that followed was absolute. The house didn't feel lonely. It felt secure. The heavy, suffocating weight of always trying to earn my daughter's love was gone. I dried my hands, walked to the hallway, and shut the solid oak door, locking the deadbolt with a satisfying click. The boundary was drawn, and the walls were solid. Monday morning, the air was crisp. I drove back to the bank, bypassing the tellers and heading straight to Mr. Henderson's office. I had spent Sunday evening reviewing my finances, plotting a course that felt right. "Morning, Andrea." David smiled, gesturing to the chair. "I take it the weekend was eventful." "You could say that," I replied, opening my purse. "I want to restructure the trust entirely. I'm removing Sarah as the primary beneficiary upon my passing." David nodded, pulling up my file on his monitor. "Understood. Who would you like to designate?" "My nephew, Benjamin Hayes," I stated. "But I also want to make an immediate transfer. I'd like to move $50,000 into a new separate account in Ben's name. I want to give him the seed money for his contracting business now, while I'm alive to see him build it." David's fingers flew across the keyboard. "That's a generous gift, Andrea. And a smart move. Ben is a hardworking young man." "He is," I agreed. "And he knows the value of a dollar. The rest of the trust will remain intact for my retirement and eventual care." We spent an hour organizing the transfers. I felt lighter with every signature. I wasn't hoarding the money out of spite. I was redirecting it toward purpose. I walked out of the bank feeling like a woman who had finally taken the steering wheel of her own life. When I got home, I called Ben. He answered on the second ring, the sound of power tools humming in the background. "Aunt Andrea, everything okay?" he asked over the noise. "Everything is wonderful, Ben. I need you to come over for dinner tomorrow night. We have some business to discuss." "Business?" He sounded confused but cheerful. "Sure thing. I'll bring dessert." I hung up the phone. I walked into my office and looked at the stack of old photos on my desk. There was a picture of Sarah at her high school graduation, smiling brightly. I didn't throw it away. I didn't hate her. I just refused to be her victim anymore. I placed the photo in a drawer and closed it. Over the next 2 weeks, the reality of the severed cord settled in Dallas. The frantic calls stopped, replaced by a series of long, manipulative emails from Sarah. She tried guilt. She tried referencing my late husband. She even sent a picture of her dog, claiming they might have to sell the house and move to a smaller place. I read them, but I didn't reply. Engaging would only give them a foothold. I learned through my sister that Greg's parents had indeed pulled their financial support when the bridge loan collapsed. Sarah had been forced to cancel her country club membership. They were selling one of the SUVs. The image she had curated so carefully was crumbling entirely because it was built on my dime. Ben, on the other hand, had cried when I showed him the new business account. He hadn't asked for a penny, and he had promised to pay me back with interest. I told him the only interest I cared about was seeing his name on the side of a commercial work van. Within 10 days, he had purchased the vehicle and registered his LLC. Life in my quiet suburban home continued. I joined a morning walking group. I started reading more. The constant low-level anxiety of anticipating Sarah's next demand was completely gone. One evening, while I was watering the hydrangeas, Patricia walked over from next door. "You look wonderful, Andrea," she noted, leaning against the wooden fence. "You've got this glow about you lately." "I dropped a lot of dead weight, Pat." I chuckled, adjusting the hose nozzle. "Well, whatever it is, it suits you." She smiled. I looked at my garden. The soil was rich, the blooms were vibrant, and the roots were deep. You can't force things to grow where the environment is toxic. Sometimes you just have to pull the weeds and tend to the things that actually appreciate the sunlight. My daughter had wanted space. I had simply given her the entire universe to navigate on her own. 3 months passed. The transition from summer to autumn brought crisp air and orange leaves to my driveway. I was sitting on the porch, wrapped in a thick cardigan, drinking apple cider. My phone chimed. It was a single text message from Sarah. "Mom, I'm sorry. Things have been really hard. Can we please talk? Just you and me." I stared at the screen. The apology was there, but the motivation was transparent. The financial pressure had finally squeezed hard enough to produce a compromise. But trust, much like a shattered glass, rarely holds water the same way again. I didn't feel the urge to rush to her rescue. I didn't feel the need to berate her either. I had established my boundary, and I was comfortable living behind it. I typed my response slowly. "I'm glad you reached out, Sarah. We can have coffee next month when I'm in town. But you need to know the financial door is closed permanently. I look forward to seeing you if you'd still like to meet." I hit send. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't stare at the screen watching for the 3 little typing dots. I set the phone down on the table and picked up my book. A few minutes later, the roar of an engine echoed down the street. Ben's new white van proudly displaying Hayes Electrical and Contracting on the side pulled into my driveway. He hopped out grinning, holding 2 large cups of coffee from my favorite local bakery. "Morning, Aunt Andrea," he called out, walking up the steps. "I have a big commercial job starting today. Just wanted to bring you a thank you coffee before I head out." I took the warm cup, smiling up at him. "Thank you, Ben. Good luck today." He drove off the future, bright ahead of him. I took a sip of the coffee, looking out over my peaceful front yard. The ties were cut. The rules were rewritten. I was no longer an ATM, an afterthought, or an uninvited guest in my own family. I was just Andrea, and for the first time in a long time, that was more than enough.